Good morning to anyone who is watching us live on the stream this morning. I am coming to you from nicely sunny Devon, so I hope wherever you are having a good day. And I'm going to welcome very early on with me Giles and Tim. So I know previously Rachel's been doing this. I'm coming for Rachel today, but it's lovely to have Giles and Tim with us today. How are you guys?
Very well, thank you.
It's also very sunny in Suffolk, so we've got both ends of the country covered here.
Brilliant.
Tim, where are you?
I'm in Kent, and it's sunny here too.
Oh, there we go. Starting to look good. Hopefully we'll get something of a summer coming up. But yes, so Giles, this is the fourth session that you have been leading for us about kind of using technology in sheds. Do you want to just kind of give us a bit of a kind of a brief intro about what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, please. If you flip onto the slides, then we might as well kick on from there. But today is about web presence and how to get your shed on the internet.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to leave you gents to kind of talk and take my space off the screen, but I will be here. And then just give me the nod whenever you want the next slide, Giles.
Thank you very much, Laura. Can we have the next slide, please? So a very quick intro to me. Hello, everybody. I am the CTO of Debenham Shed. I've previously worked in IT for far too long. Oracle. I ended up my working career at Sky TV, which was really superb fun. I always think it's weird when you see some of the kit that I started off with and how ancient and horrible it looks like compared with what we're messing around with today. I'm now retired, been retired for several years, and I, apart from doing the IT for Debenham Shed, I have a very sophisticated smart home system here. I did count the number of devices on my internet yesterday, and it was 94. So that gives you some idea of how badly I have that disease. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the last of a four sessions. They asked me to do a session at Shedfest, so I prepared some slides. And it was so long that we couldn't fit it all in on one session at Shedfest. And so what we decided to do is have these four sessions prior to Shedfest, so that when we got to Shedfest, everybody was sort of on an even level and we could discuss, really spend more time at Shedfest discussing where we go from here in terms of sharing IT knowledge, information, software, and also plans for the future about what we might, as shedders, ask UK MSA to do on our behalf, planning training, perhaps doing deals with IT companies rather than traditionally our sponsorship has been people who make paint and things like that. So the idea is that after this session, I'll put together all the questions and things that you guys raise during the call today. And at Shedfest, we sit down and we work out where do we go from here. The first four sessions, we did a bit about fixed assets, PAT testing. We went on to GDPR and membership records. The last one was the fun one where we were playing around with IT gear to automatically log people in and out of the sheds. And today we're going to be talking about web presence. So can we have the next slide, please, Laura? So what is web presence? Well, there's lots of different ways that a shed could make itself known on the internet, and here are just a few of them. And I was talking to Tim before we started, and he asked that I spend a little bit of time on this, talking about, you know, what should you use the different pieces of technology for? And it is, you know, we as shedders, we use tools for all sorts of things, and really it's a case of getting the right tool for the job. Social media, for instance, is brilliant for communication amongst a community. You know, when you all know each other, you can very rapidly disseminate information between yourselves, but that doesn't really help in terms of marketing your shed. So you may well want to use an external website to do that. You will inevitably get people like me who don't use social media. I had social media scared out of me very early days at Sky. And so I don't actually use social media hardly at all. So you need internal websites so that people can get hold of all your information internally. We usually need an internal document repository that's password protected so that you don't fall foul of GDPR problems. And then there's things like photo repositories and emails, which we'll cover a bit more detail. So those are the topics we're going to talk about today. And I hope that sort of summary, Tim, is that sort of 50,000 foot, giving you an idea?
That's absolutely fine. I mean, obviously it's multi-dimensional in terms of the functionality, and I think it's hopefully we'll learn from this session. What's the best channel to use for the various things that you need to record and disseminate.
Yeah, and of course some of these things are free and some of them you have to pay for, and so you have to weigh up, is it worth the money that I'm paying out for that particular service? And so I'll try and give you some idea of what the costs are as we go through.
And also, I suppose also the other question I'd have is, what level of technical ability, does one need to be able to sort of run these successfully?
Yes, I'm always conscious of the fact that, I do write a lot of software for Debenham. And if I get run over by a bus, that's an issue. And so what we try to do is, as far as possible, use commercial or freely available software tools that are relatively easy to manage. And I'll try and bring that out as we go through today. Okay, let's have the next slide, please. So when you're establishing a web presence, the first thing you need to have is your domain name. In our case, it's debenhamshed.org.uk. When I first started, I think you could only have 3 different suffixes. I think there was a net, there was an org, and there was a com. And now there are literally hundreds of them. .club is quite a popular one, I believe, but we chose .org.uk. You do have to rent these things. They cost a certain amount per year, and they vary depending on the suffix. So you've got 2 examples there. .org is about £12 a year, and .com are about 18. And then if you want something that's got a really sort of catchy name, then those are even much more expensive, and you can pay thousands of pounds a year if you so desire. There was once upon a time a thing called internet squatting, where people would buy these things hoping that a company would be formed with that name, and then they would sell it on for huge profit. But it is important you choose your domain name carefully, because that's the thing that you're going to tell people how to find you and how to email you. Often you'll find that you can register this with your hosting provider, which I'll be talking about in the next slide. And very often they'll give you your first year for free. But these guys are all very keen to hook you in, and there's deals for your first year, but then you have to pay more subsequent years. So just buyer beware there a bit.
What's the difference between .org.uk and .co.uk then?
None at all, actually. Anybody can be anyone. There is no vetting process at all. It's what you choose to be. Org used to be originally organisations, and so it tends to be used by non-profits. .com was commercials, so tends to be used by commercial organisations. And then they added the country suffixes after that, so you got org.uk, org.fr, etc.
I suppose having .uk somewhere in your domain name helps in terms of identify that because there are other sheds around the world that I know that we've had contact from people, certainly via Facebook, who think we're in Australia, and I suppose the UK could be a useful thing in saying, well, you're UK based rather than in the States or anywhere else in the world.
Well, yeah, especially in this part of the world where there's a lot of towns in North America that have got the same name as villages over here, which could be confusing or is confusing, and this would take that away. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So the next slide is the hosting provider. So this is sort of the guy that's going to provide the service for you. As I said earlier on, they may give you the domain name as part of the service, and quite often when you sign up, they'll ask you to choose a domain name as you sign up to them. The thing we probably actually use the most is that they provide us with our email service, and they provide us 2 types of email. They provide us with proper email boxes. In other words, it's just like your private email box. It's, Fred at whatever your domain is, and that has a proper email. But they also do forwarders. And a forwarder is where it's an address, like we use, say, webmaster at debenhamshed.co.uk. That isn't actually a mailbox in its own right. What it does is any email addressed to there goes to my email address. It's automatically forwarded to my private email address. Benefit of that is I don't have to monitor lots and lots of mailboxes, because all that email is going to come into my email box. The downside is that if you reply it will be from your private email address. So if you're very careful about how you use your private email address, which I am, then you do need a proper email address that you then reply from, rather than from your private email address. So there's pros and cons of those two things. Typically, a hosting provider will give you 99 or so email addresses, which is far in excess of what most sheds will need. So it's a grossly, get more than you really need in that one. The next thing they'll give you is a web server for your public and your member websites. And normally, in terms of space, again, it's far in excess of what a shed would normally use, unless you upload lots and lots of videos. Generally, for the sort of stuff we're using websites for is for our member documents and our public-facing websites, so we don't get anywhere near that limit. They also. Sorry,
could you have sort of a general inquiry form or a membership application form within?
Yeah, I'm going to cover that a bit later on. Yes, so that's how you would normally when somebody says we're doing a funding application and somebody says, well, what do you do at Debenham Shed? We'll say go to debenhamshed.org.uk, and on that we've got all of the public facing pages about what we do, how we're involved in the community, some of the stats about the shed, lots and lots and lots of photos, because that really tells a better story than any words that we can write. And then we have the internal facing website, which I'll talk about a bit later on, for our minutes and stuff like that we want members to have access to. We also use our web hosting provider to hold our CCTV images, because we are a remote shed. Our CCTV system uploads all the files, all the videos and images onto the hosting provider, so that as soon as they happen, so that in the event that a bad person nicks our DVR, we will still have the images up on the hosting provider's machine. Typically, a hosting provider will also give you some tools, and probably the most useful one is WordPress, which again I'll talk about a bit later on. But WordPress allows non-technical people to build quite sophisticated pages. Certainly, if you go to debenhamshed.org.uk, you'll see all of that is in WordPress. There's not a line of code in that very, very sophisticated website, and there's millions of users of it, but we'll come back to that. In terms of writing your own code, the most popular for web are things called PHP and MySQL being a database, and PHP being a code which allows you to build websites. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but that's where all our applications that we use in the shed, like our fixed assets, logging of people in and out of the shed, are all written in PHP and MySQL. There's a huge selection of hosting providers. Fascinatingly, most of them are owned by a group that owns GoDaddy. So you'll find that you'll go with a service provider, and then when you look underneath it, you find out that the internals are pretty much exactly the same as GoDaddy's. We use a British subsidiary of GoDaddy called Heart, and that costs us £17 a month plus VAT. There are deals for the first year, etc., etc. So that's just an indicative figure. You'll find all sorts of prices when you look at it. So be very aware of first year deals. Quite often they'll virtually give you the first year, but it will be quite expensive the second year. And of course, by that time, you've invested all your time in building your website and uploading your documents. Yeah. So moving from one web hosting provider to another is non-trivial. It's certainly a non-trivial exercise, and so I would, do your due diligence when you choose your hosting provider. And one of the things that sort of seed a question for UK MSA is that 1,100 websites, 1,100 of us paying £17 a month. I wonder whether there's any way that we could ask UK MSA to talk to people like GoDaddy and things like that to see if we can negotiate a better deal for sheds, because I'm sure that. Bearing in mind the way they give you away first year deals, there must be a negotiation to be had with these big hosting providers to see if we can get a better deal for sheds in the future. Okay, let's have the next slide, please. If anybody has any questions, by the way, in flight, please type them in, and I'll do my best to try and answer them. There you go. Thank you very much, Laura. So the next thing you need to think about is security. And the way that the websites do security is through a thing called an SSL certificate. What it does is it enables the encryption of your data as it goes through the internet, and it also ensures that the web server that somebody's connected to is who they say they are, so that it's not spoofed by a bad third party. Critically, if you do anything vaguely financial, or if you're handling any personal data in your website, then you must use SSL. And the way to see if a site is using SSL is if you look at the URL at the top of your browser, you'll see it's got an S on the end of HTTP. If you see a site with HTTPS, then you know that the data that you're sending to that site is encrypted and that they are who they think they are. Also, most browsers nowadays will put a little padlock up. I'm just looking at mine, and it looks like Chrome has stopped doing that. I think if it's not got HTTPS, they put a padlock that's open. And they're also now giving warnings about sites that don't use SSL. So if you went ahead without a certificate, people coming to your site may well get a nasty message saying this site isn't secure. Are you sure who you want to do? Do you want to proceed, etc.? So even if you're not using it financial and you're not using it for personal data, it's good practice to use an SSL because it'll be easier for people to connect to your site. You can get them for free. Let's Encrypt is a good free SSL certificate issuer, certificate authority, but they require you to install software on your site to verify that you are who you are. And unfortunately, certainly Hart used to let us use Let's Encrypt, but then I think they spotted that that's what everybody was using, and so they've stopped that now. They've stopped that software for running. And I know why, because they wanted to sell their own service, so they charged us £50 a year plus that for them to provide the SSL certificate. So if you're lucky that your hosting provider allows you to do it, then you can get a free certificate. But I would, when you're budgeting, I would budget £50 a year for your SSL certificate.
So if you're looking to sell stuff that you make on the site, then you would recommend that you have this.
Absolutely, yep. Definitely, quite definitely. I mean, they're fairly straightforward. If you buying one from Hart, they do all your admin for you. You just fill in their form online, and bang, it all works. If you use Let's Encrypt, it's a bit more of a struggle to get that to work, right. Depending on what software you install and what have you. This sort of encryption is non-trivial by design. You don't want it easy to break the thing. So and my recommendation was if you can afford it, get your service provider to provide it.
Good.
Okay, next slide, please. How to create web pages. If you're hard, then you're going to write the HTML by hand. But practically nobody does that nowadays. It's nearly always generated. You can always see this, if you're on a web page, if you hit the right mouse on a page, there's an option to view page source. If you look at that and it's pages and pages and pages long for a fairly simple page, then you know that was generated by a content management system. By far the most popular one is WordPress. There are literally millions and millions and millions of sites using it. It is free, which is superb. I mean, it's a big old lump of software to get for free, I have to say. The great benefit of it is if I get run over by a bus, there's at least 3 people, none of who can write code, that can administer our public web page in WordPress. It literally is that easy to use. It's got a sort of, what you see is what you get, editor, and you can include documents, photos, a blog. There's a huge selection of things in the base product, but then there are literally hundreds of plugins to it that people have written. You just simply go to the plugin option, search for what you want, and then install it, and you're away. And here are a few of the ones that we use. There's a great plugin for MailChimp. What that does is it allows people to register with us an interest in our newsletter. And then when they just give it their email address, and that feeds straight into MailChimp, and then our administrator can see that there's been a new person into MailChimp, and they approve it. Once they've done that, then we can all the mails that we send out will go to that person. So it sort of closes that loop quite nicely. It's all within GDPR. It provides the unsubscribe function as well. So it's a really, really useful thing. There's a couple there that we use for photos. There's the modular gallery, gives you that sort of matrix of photos. All you do is you just feed it with a load of photos and it generates the matrix, resizes them all so they'll fit on the page and stuff like that. So all you have to do is upload the photos, tell which ones you want in a particular gallery, where you want it in your website, and bang, it's done. Meta Slider is a thing for producing a sort of a sliding gallery of photos. So you say, I've got 5. So our history section, for instance, we've got photos of the shed as it got built, and all it does is it just simply flips one to the next, one to the next, one to the next across, so you can see the history of the slider. We use it for events, so it has a calendar. That's another plugin, which allows you to put a calendar up on the internet. People can see when you're open, when you're doing things, when you're attending things. But it also has quite a nice ticketing add-in that allows you to sell tickets. It has a plugin for PayPal. I'm pretty sure it's PayPal or SumUp. It's one of the two. I can't remember which it is now. But you can actually properly sell tickets to your event through that. It doesn't cost you any money, unlike Eventbrite or something like that, where if you're selling tickets, there is a fee. The last one actually is quite interesting. It's called Limit Login Attempts. What it does is it tracks anybody trying to log into the admin pages of your site. And we probably get about, well, it goes in spurts, but I think the other day there were over 100 attempts to log into our website. People just using brute force, user ID, admin, password, blah, 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 and on they go. And what it does is if you get the wrong password, it progressively makes it a longer time before you can have another go. So I think in our case, if you put 4 logins wrong, you have to wait 20 minutes. If you then do another one wrong, then you have to wait 48 hours. If you do another one wrong, it's another 48 hours. So it makes it a big disincentive for people to try and hack into your WordPress site.
Do you have anything similar to those that you find on many websites? I'm not a robot sort of thing. You have to start clicking on.
There is a Chatska thing. I've not used it myself, but yeah, there is one. I've not played with that.
Okay.
We don't need that. But yeah, I mean, there's literally hundreds of them. It's amazing the sort of stuff that people have generated for them. Right. I have to say it's only really useful for public web pages. The concept of users logging in and getting access to data is I think clumsy. Clumsy is probably the right word. You can use it for that, and a lot of people do, but I find it quite hard to administer because you've got to administer all the IDs and passwords and stuff like that. And I think it's a little bit overkill for certainly our requirements. It may be that an individual shed does find it useful for their private pages, but we don't. We have a different mechanism.
Okay.
Any more, Tim?
No, I think
any more from the field. Sorry, Tim.
The fact that all these plugins are available on the one thing, the WordPress, means, to my mind, you're in one place, and you can make it sophisticated or as simple as you want. Exactly.
I mean, one of the things that I did think, again, picking up on questions that we might do at Shedfest, was whether it was appropriate to do a training session on WordPress. We clearly don't have enough time today to go through it in any detail, but perhaps we could set up a session after Shedfest where I just take people through the way we use it.
I think that will be extremely useful. It could be one of the break-off sessions or something like that at Shedfest, where, and I think if a short demonstration would sort of physically show people how easy it is, would give people more confidence to get a website, and B, or think again about how their website is run. And
I think most people who haven't seen it are surprised at how professional the websites are that it produces. It has templates, again, hundreds of templates. So you can start up with a very professional looking website that you've made with no coding, no marketing experience at all. It's pretty good for that.
Right.
Okay, next slide, please, Laura. Security levels. So we operate a number of different security levels. So for public documents, we just use our WordPress site. There's no logins, nothing. That's it. You get it. For the members' documents with no private data, in other words, things like the minutes of our meetings, the sheds, procedures documents and stuff like that, we don't really mind if the world sees those, but we don't want the world to be able to edit them. And so what we do is we have a members website where it's what's called security by obscurity. In other words, you only know where it is if you know the URL. But once you've got the URL, you can get into it, but you can't do any edits.
Right.
For restricted applications, so things like our fixed asset database and the member login thing, there is a login, and normally we just give that login to the committee members, and it's all held in a MySQL database, which we back up. So that's properly secured. Often parts of it have read-only access so that anybody could see the read-only part of it, the public part of it, but they can't edit it or they can't get access to any of the restricted pieces of data. For documents that are really private, our internal documents in process, we're right now working towards becoming a CIO along with many other sheds. Then we use Google Drive, and we rely on the Google account security mechanism to protect those documents. I don't think it's an ideal situation because you have to kind of understand Google Drive and be able to log into it, and I think you can now use it without a Google account, but it's certainly a lot more difficult. But it is secure, and it means you're not going to run awry of the GDPR requirements. So those are the 4 security levels that we use. But yeah, the obscurity is the one that's a little bit odd in that, but it seems to work reasonably well.
Great.
Okay, next slide. I'm trying to press the button here for the next slide, which is a bit foolish because Laura's driving it. So internal documents, you must obviously protect them. And we use Google Drive, but there are lots of different other mechanisms. I think, Tim, you said another shed was using something else, weren't they?
Yeah, they're using Office 365,
Office 365
on a family sort of basis, family access.
Yeah, that's perfectly acceptable. Really good for sharing documents. Google Docs is a bit weird in that when you're editing them, you normally use their editor, which if you're not familiar with is slightly different to Microsoft Word and OpenOffice, but not that much different. It's difficult to use. And as I said earlier on, we use apps to provide access to our shed-wide documents. Next slide, please. For the web applications, and as you can see, we've got a fair number of them. These are all apps that I've written using MySQL, which is a free database, a relational database. And we use PHP, and PHP is a really nice language. And what PHP does is it pulls information out of the database and uses it to build web pages. So what you actually download to the browser is a language called HTML, and PHP sits between the HTML and the MySQL database. And so on our members only website, we give restricted access to all of these apps. Now, one of the questions again for shedders at Shedfest is there any interest in other sheds getting involved in this? Would they like copies of the code? Obviously, I can't write individual versions for all 1,100 sheds. That would be impossible. But one of the options would be to bundle these applications up, put them into a repository like GitHub, and then sheds could then download that for free, make their amendments they want, and work it from there. I'm currently working with Felixstowe Shed on the sign-in system for them. One of the guys saw the previous session, rang me up and said, can I pop over, and I've got all the hardware, can you help me get it to work? And last week we managed to get a Felixstowe tag logged all the way through to his spreadsheet on his laptop, so that was quite a good thing to do. So whether we repeated that for other sheds, I don't know, but I think at Shedfest I'd like to discuss that with other shed members to say, well, what do you want to do with this stuff? It's all out there if you'd like to pick it up.
I think it really depends on the side of the shed, but I think if they were available on a sort of pick and choose, like pick and mix sort of selection process, that would be very useful.
Yeah, I think you want to do them one at a time. This has taken me 3 years to build. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But one of the first things I did before this was I wrote code that writes code, and so actually they all look very similar because they're all generated. So
right.
Maybe people are interested in the background as to how these things are built, which is another thing that we could take as a session off-site if there are people who've got reasonable technical skills would like to pick that up. Okay, next slide, please. The last one's a bit sort of, it's a bit, I think, I'm not sure if this is peculiar to where our shed is, but I suspect it's not. So can we have the next slide, please? So our shed is 4 steel containers welded together with the walls taken out, which means it's a brilliant Faraday cage. Once the doors are shut, no network comes in at all. We're remote. We have no telephone connection. And so what we use is the white box in the middle, which is a 4G modem. And what that does is it bridges between a Wi-Fi network inside the shed and the 4G mobile network outside the shed, using that aerial you can see mounted on a mast above the shed. And that gives us 2 things, really. It gives us Wi-Fi inside the shed, but it also gives us a phone number because it is effectively a mobile phone in a box with some plugs on it. So that we have actually that way got a telephone number for the shed. It's okay. It costs us about, I think we use Smarty for our SIM card, and I think we're paying about £10 a month for 60 gigabytes. We started with quite a low amount of data, and that very quickly got used up and it kept running out. So we use quite a bit now. Part of that rationale is, of course, this is how we get our CCTV images back to the server. So we do use possibly more data than you would if you were just using it for shed applications and people in the shed. So that's something that maybe other sheds will be interested in talking to us about at Shedfest if they are off grid as we are, and they'd like to know how we put that together. Then I can spend some time at Shedfest talking about that.
I think if a deal could be done with a mobile phone provider or whatever, because I think we're much the same in terms of we piggyback off access to the internet via a library, which is in the building next door to us. But it's pretty patchy, and of course it's unsecure. So we 9 times out of 10 we piggyback off someone's phone.
Yeah.
As a hotspot sort of thing.
That works.
But it works for the amount of data that we or the amount of access that we need to get.
It's surprising how many as you go about how many hotspots there are, because of course what a lot of people don't know is that with most internet service providers, EE, BT, etc., that group, O2 is the same. When you take broadband, it actually creates an SSID for the public site as well, that people can hotspot off. It's quite handy once you know that and you're traveling about to just nick somebody else's broadband. But if you're in the middle of a field, 2 miles out of a village, that doesn't really work. And of course, we're in a tin box, so we have to have an external aerial anyway. But this works pretty well. So again, one for people. The last photo on there, it's obviously we then need Wi-Fi outside the shed for the Wi-Fi cameras. And so we have another repeater just outside the shed, which is wired. Seems a bit crazy, but it's wired into the router, the router inside the shed, and then the wireless cameras can then see it when it's outside. Okay, I think that's probably the last of the technical slides. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura? So the question is, what next? Obviously, we've talked about most of these in flight, but certainly if there's anybody on the call that would like to add their own questions that you'd like me to try and deal with at Shedfest, I will be forearmed and bring whatever we need to be able to spend more time on it. But I think we picked up a lot of these, WordPress training sessions, Shed deals with hosting providers, with
Yeah.
broadband providers. And what I'm going to do over the next few days before Shedfest is pop all of the questions together from the 4 sessions. And then when we get to Shedfest, I'll spend most of the time talking about those and getting the views of what the shedders want, and then working with UK MSA to take it forward.
Good.
So thank you very much, everybody. Any more questions?
No, I think that as far as I'm concerned, that you've answered all of my questions. Thanks very much, Giles.
Oh, Peter asked us how much the hardware costs. Peter, I'm not actually sure. This is for the router. I think it's about 100 quid. I'm not sure though, but you can get a lot cheaper ones. I would have to Google it to find out, but it wasn't silly money.
So if anyone does have a question, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you just comment below, then that question will come straight through to us, because obviously we can't hear you, but we can see what you type, and then we can ask Giles your question. Giles, I've got 2 questions that I've just been thinking about. First is, what's the kind of first thing? So if you're starting up a shed, what do you think would be the kind of the priority, the first thing to kind of get going for a shed?
Social media first,
okay.
Because the most important people are your shed membership, and you need to establish a community in your shed membership. So social media is great for that. It's also great for, the power's off at the sheds today, so we're not opening, things like that. You can communicate that very, very quickly with social media. It interrupts people. Annoyingly, when you're in a restaurant, it interrupts people. But yeah, I would always start with social media. And because, when you get to creating your website and things like that, you do need to just do a little bit of research about how you're going to do it. That's going to take you a bit longer. So it's worth spending time on how you plan to do the rest of your web presence. But it's always social media first. Probably after that, I'd look at securing documents and sharing documents, because when you're setting up, there's a lot of documents you're going to create. Many of them may well be sensitive. And so, I'd probably go social media, document repository, public web presence, in that order. Yeah,
because I think the other thing I was just going to ask you about was there's a couple of sheds that over time have, changed their name. So, which is not necessarily, social media. It's a little bit easier to kind of change that. Sheds who are the men's shed and go to becoming a community shed, or kind of just in those early stages, that kind of changes. So is it kind of wise to sometimes just kind of wait for some of the kind of bits that cost you a little bit more money and kind of buying into that name?
So you're not really, because the domain name can be just a forwarder. So you could buy, say, debenhamshed.org.uk. You could then subsequently buy or rent debenhamshed.cio.org.uk or something like that, and just have the old ones automatically forwarded to the new ones. And then over time, when the old one is, you can't really justify keeping it, you can just get rid of that, and people that no longer will respond, and people will use the new one. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, because at the end of the day, our actual website is something like xy123897621 whatever at heart.internet.com or something. It's the domain name that indirects it into there. So you can actually change relatively easily. And of course, with emails, you can always turn all your email addresses into forwarders, and then they'll drop to wherever they're going to go to.
Yeah.
The one thing I didn't say is forwarders can go to lists as well. So we have a forwarder called committee, and that forwards to the individual committee members, which is quite a good way of, as your committee changes, the email address of the committee doesn't.
Yes. Yeah, and I think we've noticed also there's quite a lot of sheds who, when they're setting up, rather than just kind of having an individual's email address, even, they've set themselves up with a free Google email address in the early stages, because you can hand it on, you can forward it on.
Yeah.
To a committee. So actually, there is that kind of legacy element of it, which can be super important for sheds. Like you were saying, it's that kind of, making sure that it's not all down to just one individual who, if something happens to them, if they get ill, if they move, it all kind of, it doesn't implode. You can kind of pass it on in that kind of legacy and succession planning.
Forwarders are really, really useful for that, because you're separating the individual from the job role. And as people change and move on, then you don't have to change. All you have to do is change the forwarding, and that's it. Job's done.
Yeah, brilliant. As I say, if anyone does have any more questions, just type them below. And
in response to Peter, I'll do a bit of Googling. I'll let him know and answer to his question. Peter's the guy in Felixstowe I'm working with on his tag. I suspect it's the same Peter. There may be more than one Peter at Felixstowe.
Maybe more than one. Yeah. Brilliant. So, if anyone does have any questions, then am I right in thinking the email to can get in touch with you before Shedfest, info@debenhamshed.org.uk.
That's correct. An example of a forwarder.
Yes. And like Giles said, when we are at Shedfest on the 11th of July, Giles is going to be running a session that you can attend and come and talk to Giles about technology in your sheds and how that can get to you. To anyone watching, we do know that we hit our first limit of tickets on Shedfest. They will, in the next hour or so, we will be releasing a second batch of tickets for Shedfest. It's shaping up to be a great one. It is the most tickets we've ever had booked so far. So if you haven't booked your ticket yet, I would encourage you to get online in the next kind of hour or two and get your tickets booked, and we will see people at Shedfest. But any kind of final words, Giles or Tim?
Well, first of all, thanks everybody for attending and listening to these. And I hope at Shedfest we can have a productive session where we move forward with sharing technology amongst the shedders in the UK.
I think it's a great idea in terms of, this adds a whole new dimension in terms of the efficient running of sheds and helping them sort of move forward. Yeah,
definitely. And I think although Giles, I think the thing for me is looking at so many tools have been built now that actually, if you do feel a bit more kind of afraid of technology or feel like you're not used to it, I know that, for even me and my job, kind of, WordPress can make all those things kind of smooths it over and makes it very, look nice. And actually, there are so many guides out there. The amount of times you can type into YouTube, how do I, and you can find a guide that kind of helps you.
So Laura, are you going to give the WordPress training then?
Probably not, because you might not want to realise how many times I've broken the website before and had to phone someone and go, I need this fixed. I need this fixed.
I remember in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
I will. Thank you ever so much for your time, Giles. Not just for today, but for the 4 sessions before. And we're really looking forward to kind of hearing from you at Shedfest. And we are hopefully going to be working on some of those different kind of bonuses and kind of those member benefits for sheds as technology is moving forwards as well. So have a lovely morning, everyone, and we will speak to you at Shedfest.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.